Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for coming back and joining us for our main session here where we get to listen to our speaker today. This is again Silicon Valley M&A Affinity Group meeting, June 2022. And today we have Russell Hancock, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Joint Venture Silicon Valley. He's been in that position since 2003. And he's been described as a civic leader, a community gatherer, an institution builder, a civic entrepreneur, social scientist, and advocate for regionalism. He's grown that organization tenfold since he started, and he has a very powerful boards, mayors, CEOs, university presidents. Russell also founded the annual State of the Valley Conference. It's a town hall meeting that gets 1,500 leaders together for a day and dialogue and discussion about the Valley. Russell was educated at Harvard in the field of government. He has a PhD in political science from Stanford University. He also continues to teach at Stanford, in fact. And finally, Russell's been named by the Silicon Valley Business Journal as in fact, he's regularly named to its annual list of Silicon Valley's most influential players. And he's interviewed in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Businessweek, Financial Times, and Forbes. And you might see him as a frequent guest on NBC Nightly News. And finally, Russell lives in Palo Alto. And he is also, on top of all of that, he is also a concert pianist, and he appears as a soloist with symphony orchestras across the nation. So with that, I want to thank you for being here, Russell, to talk to us about what all the good things you're doing at Joint Venture Silicon Valley.
Thank you, Roger. That was a really lovely and gracious introduction, and I truly appreciate it. I lead an interesting organization. We are a think tank in all of the classical ways that you would think of a think tank. We do research, we provide analysis, we track data, we provide those data sets in various indexes that we publish. So that's one thing that we do. But the organization is also different from a think tank because we're also a do tank. In other words, we will take the analysis coming out of the institute side of our house, and we will tackle Silicon Valley problems, whatever they may be. And we do it using the analysis of our institute, and we gather the leaders of Silicon Valley to tackle all of those problems. So that's who I am. That's what the organization does. And if you want to know more about it, I'll throw up the website. It's jointventure.org. And we would love for every one of your companies to be involved in joining us. But today, it's my assignment, if I understand it correctly, to update you on the state of the region. So I'm going to take you through some material and give you a sense of where we are right now as a region, our major trends, and some of the challenges that we face. So let me, I can't share my screen. It says the host is disabled screen sharing. So I wonder if somebody can make that happen. Adam, perhaps, or somebody.
Give me a moment here. I actually made you the co-host. Let me try again.
Yeah, okay. Not a
Thank
problem.
you.
Just let me know. And I can do this without slides too. It's not a problem.
Oh, no. With slides, a lot better. Here you go. Try this again.
Good. I am now going to share my screen. And there we go. Let's see if I can do this. So there you have it. That's us looking at Silicon Valley from space, actually looking at the greater Bay Area from space. And I just want to start by reminding everybody that actually what you're looking at here is one of the most extraordinary places on the planet. It is the most prodigious regional economy in the history of regional economies. That is an objective statement. That's not me being grandiose or braggadocious. I'm just telling you those are the facts. There's no other place on the planet in our history that has experienced so much continuous growth and expansion, so much innovation, so much entrepreneurship, so much company formation. The impact of those companies on the world has been transformative. And what's most striking is that it keeps happening. It's happened over a 75, 80-year period. It's happened through successive waves of innovation, and it has required the Valley and its industry clusters to invent themselves, then reinvent themselves, and to do this multiple times over the generations. So we should never lose sight of that. It's an extraordinary place. Now, when the pandemic set in, people thought that we would be in some jeopardy. I was among them. I thought that this was going to be serious, that maybe this would be the thing that would finally take Silicon Valley out of its game. It turned out not to be the case, and I'm going to explain that with a couple of charts here in just a few seconds. But actually, what happened, I probably don't have to explain this to you, is that the pandemic turned out to be a bonanza for Silicon Valley, and especially for its driving industries. And I'm talking about the tech sector, because our Silicon Valley companies were providing precisely what was required for a world that went into a sheltering environment. I mean, just to be obvious, we're sitting here talking on Zoom right now, and Zoom is a Silicon Valley company, but also the platforms for goods delivery, for meal delivery, for the delivery of entertainment while we were sheltering, the devices, the technologies, the chips, the architecture, all of those things came out of Silicon Valley, and the world badly needed it. And as a result, it turns out that the pandemic was great for our economy. I'm going to dramatize this for you by showing you here Silicon Valley going all the way back to the turn of the century. And you can see right after the epic recession in 2009, 2010, we took a small dip, but then we were the first economy to emerge out of that recession. And as you can see, we had sustained growth each year, more impressive than the last. And that would have continued. I want to be clear about that. When the pandemic set in, we chose to put into place an artificial intervention. In other words, we chose to shutter certain parts of our economy, and as a result, they shut down completely. And then you can see right there in 2020 we had a job dip. But by 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, we're growing again. And now, let me show you what happens here. By the end of 2021, in other words, 6 months ago, we were already job positive. In other words, we were growing and exceeding where we had been prior to the pandemic. Now, those jobs were in the tech sector, and we'll talk about that in a moment. This is your unemployment chart. We're currently at about 2.1% unemployment. That's an update even from this chart. Economists will tell you that anything below 3% is considered full employment. And so that's what happened here. We spiked up. Those are the artificial interventions. We figured out, for the most part, how to recover most of those jobs by introducing new protocols, working remotely, distancing, all of the rest. And so here we are, back at practically full employment 2 years later. Look what happened to our tech sector. This is market cap, and it had that immediate drop when the pandemic set in. That's to be expected. But then we came roaring back through the depths of the pandemic. You can see our tech sector just recapturing and then exceeding the market cap. It reached $14 trillion before the stock market started tumbling just a few weeks ago. And I don't actually have charts that show the result of the last sort of valuations. But the point I'm making here is that we exceeded 14 trillion in market cap, and that's more than we had ever seen in our entire history. That during a pandemic is extraordinary. Here's what happened in the venture capital industry. We never thought we'd see anything like this, certainly not in a pandemic. That number you see, that last bar on the right, is $95 billion in venture capital. That's funds that were generated here and invested here in Silicon Valley. That's just amazing. I want to point out that this chart is inflation adjusted, and that total, 95 billion, exceeds everything we have ever seen. In fact, in most cases, it doubles everything that we've ever seen. And it is practically double what we saw during the dot-com craziness back at the turn of the century. So that's just absolutely remarkable. Correspondingly, we see tremendous amounts of startup activity. And this is a chart going back to 1992. And you can see that the startup activity there is record breaking. And we didn't expect that during the height of a pandemic. And yet there it is. You may find it interesting that we're reporting here both San Francisco and Silicon Valley. In other words, south part of the Bay, the entire peninsula, San Francisco. It's interesting that San Francisco has become a real location for startup activity. In fact, it's starting to outnumber Silicon Valley proper in terms of the startup activity that's happening. And you probably feel that, you probably understand that instinctively. That's what's going on. Angel investment also had a banner year as we rolled through the pandemic. This is a chart that shows you unicorns and decacorns. I'm telling people that the term unicorn is no longer apt. You know this, I don't have to explain this to you, but a unicorn is a privately held company that is valued at more than $1 billion, billion with a B. And the reason they named them unicorns is because they are considered practically mythical because they are so rare and unusual, but that's no longer the case. In Silicon Valley, we have herds of unicorns. In the Bay Area, also the case, more than any other part of the world. It's really quite extraordinary, and that continued throughout the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, we also continued to see the completion of development. I didn't expect that. We saw construction grind to a halt in those early months of the pandemic, but then they figured it out. New protocols, new disinfecting procedures, distancing procedures, the masking and all of that, and the construction resumed. More significantly, the major drivers of that construction, which would be our tech companies, especially the largest ones, they didn't call off any of their leasing activity or any of their expansion plans. We thought they would. The nature of work has changed. We're seeing that these look like permanent changes. People are seeing working from home to be not just a perk, but actually a right. And in light of those developments, we thought that this would probably spell a new dynamic for commercial construction. But as of the end of the year, we haven't observed that. All of those projects are proceeding, and we're actually approving in the pipeline. We're approving more construction than we ever have in previous years. So it's all pretty amazing. So there you have it. That's me talking out of one side of my mouth, telling you that Silicon Valley, pandemic notwithstanding, is still an amazing place. It's still a prodigious place. Those are all true statements. I should also tell you that in just the last few weeks, there have been significant developments. We're seeing some revaluations on the stock markets. We're seeing some of the major tech firms have their stock prices come tumbling down. We see that as signs of not a collapse, but maybe just some necessary adjustments. And those adjustments will be taking place over the coming year. And the evidence of it is that there are some layoffs in some of our key technology firms, and I can't quantify any of that for you yet. And so that's something that we'll just have to wait and see how this next chapter plays out. However, now I'm going to talk out of the other side of my mouth because I told you that we have this prodigious economy. You should also understand that there was real pain and suffering that was experienced during the pandemic in our economy by our neighbors and our brothers and sisters and our friends and our colleagues and our workmates. This is a chart that shows you that the tech sector, that thriving, burgeoning tech sector, is accounting for about 30% of our economy. That's growing. It used to be about a quarter of our economy. Now it's approaching about a third of our economy. However, the blue slice of the pie, the big chunk that takes up about half of the pie, those are the other kinds of jobs. These are what we call jobs of place. These are retail jobs, manufacturing, construction, healthcare, education, the kinds of jobs, in other words, that you would find in any other economy in any other part of the country. And that part of our pie is shrinking as a result of the pandemic, and it's not yet recovering. In fact, you should understand that even though I told you that there's 2% unemployment, that is not the case when we go sector by sector. And these sectors are still experiencing 10, 20% unemployment. They're not recovering. We thought that as we emerged out of the pandemic, it would be like throwing that switch back on, and people would just take their places and we would continue firing on all of our cylinders. We have now learned that that's actually not the case. What we're learning is that there was a lot of displacement during the pandemic, and a lot of our people that were working in the service sector have left the Bay Area. And I'll say more about that at the end. We've also learned that the people who have remained have emerged with a new set of values, a new way of seeing the world, newfound bargaining power, and so there's an adjustment. There's an adjustment in all of these sectors: arts, entertainment, transportation, accommodation, retail, nonprofits, my industry. There's adjustment going on here. And employers will tell you that hiring is very difficult, even though there are openings. They're not being filled by that set of people that we would have thought would immediately fill them. And so there's a period of adjustment here that is going to take us longer than we thought. Okay, now I'd like to just chat about our income picture, because I think this is very striking, and we should all have a healthy sense of this if we're thinking about our region. This is just an extraordinary chart. This shows you Silicon Valley and San Francisco in terms of our average annual earnings and how we stack up when we compare ourselves to the rest of the country. So you will see that the average annual earnings in Silicon Valley are about $170,000. And by that, I mean all forms of compensation divided by the number of people in the workforce, $170,000. The national figure is $70,000. That's extraordinary. We're more than double the national average. Now, we have higher costs in this region, but our costs aren't double the cost of other places. And so this shows you that Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, continue to be a place where people can, there really is something to this notion that people can pursue a path to prosperity here. Here's median household income. We like to show different forms of measuring income, because our averages, like this chart, those averages are always going to be skewed because we have so many extremely high earners in the region. So here's median. It shows you median. But even when you use median household income, you can still see that we're fully double the national average. In other words, it's extraordinary. I'll keep making that point. But here I want to show you how that wealth is distributed. This chart is showing you that in Silicon Valley, we have about 50 billionaires. We have about 300,000 millionaires, and that's in terms of their liquid assets, and that we have some pretty amazing income divides. The chart is showing you actually that the top 1% of earners, actually, let me show you this. I want to show it to you in plain English. In Silicon Valley, this is what the chart is showing you. Households in the top quarter, the top 25% of earners, are actually holding 92% of the wealth. 92% of the wealth. Households in the bottom half are holding less than 2% of the wealth. In other words, Silicon Valley has the nation's most stark and yawning income divides and wealth divides. This is the Genie Coefficient. You probably remember that the Genie Coefficient is a form of measuring income equality. And what it means is that a Genie of 100 would mean that one person holds all of the wealth. And a Genie of 0 would mean that all of the people are holding all of the wealth equally. So I thought you'd be fascinated to see this. Through much of Silicon Valley's history, we were a middle-class town, just a regular place with regular folks, working at Lockheed, living in tract houses in Sunnyvale and mowing their own lawns. Now, somewhere around the turn of the century, that story started to change on us dramatically. And what we see now is a gain in the Gini coefficient of more than 30 points over the past 15 years. We used to be right there in the middle. We are now approaching 70 on the Gini coefficient. Now, economists who study international development and the emergence of developing countries, they will tell you that a Gini coefficient, anything over 60, is considered politically unstable. So that's something that we also have to be reckoning with in Silicon Valley. Many people are surprised to see this. They're surprised to learn that fully 1/3 of households in Silicon Valley are not self-sufficient. That means that they, left to their own devices, cannot make ends meet. And in order to make ends meet, they're receiving some form of assistance. And that means it's coming from a friend, a extended family, from a church or faith community, or from a government program. 1/3 of the households in Silicon Valley, not self-sufficient. This number is extraordinary. I wanted to call it out. We've learned that in Silicon Valley, 44% of children, of all the children living in Silicon Valley, are living in homes that are not self-sufficient. And all of this is happening at the very same time that inflation is set in, and it couldn't be more inopportune. People are getting absolutely hammered by inflation, especially over energy prices, including at the gas pump, but also including basic things like food, like childcare. So it's tough. It's tough out there. So now I've told you two different stories. One story I told you is that we're a prodigious economy and that we are a wealth-making machine. That is all true. It's completely true. But now I've told you about the other side of Silicon Valley's story, which is that it's a very difficult place, a punishing place. It's a place where not all of us are thriving. In fact, fully 1/3 of us are not even getting by. And so Silicon Valley is both things. And we need to understand that we are a complex and multifaceted place. Now, I should watch the clock because I promised to leave plenty of time for questions. So let me just blow through this next thing. I was going to tell you about housing, but I think you already understand this. So I don't need to detail all of this for you. We have the nation's highest housing prices. Let me just leave it at that. That didn't used to be the case. It is now. The median sale price of a house in Silicon Valley is $1.3 million. Here's the percentage of first-time home buyers that can afford that median priced home, and that percentage is decreasing. I'll just skip over to this. Here's your problem. The reason housing is so expensive, it's very simple. It's supply and demand. And the green bars on this chart are showing you the number of jobs that we've created each successive year. The yellow bars are showing you how many housing units we have approved in those same years. And so you can see the mismatch. There's the mismatch. It's about 7-to-1. Over the past 7 years, we're not going up to the pandemic. So just prior to the pandemic, we added about 800,000 jobs in our region. That's the equivalent of taking a city the size of San Francisco and dropping that onto our landscape. But during that same period of time, we only approved 170,000 new units. So it's about 7-to-1. That's the mismatch, and so no surprise. We just have the highest housing prices anywhere in the country. Now, I've talked some about how this is a difficult place for Silicon Valley if you're not happen to be in one of our tech sectors or one of our high flyers. So in our work, we've also been trying to bring this equity lens and look at those things from a race and ethnicity standpoint as well. I'm going to blow through this really quickly so that we have time for questions. Here's the point. We're a very diverse region, and we celebrate that. We absolutely celebrate that. We're not a majority region. We used to be a majority white population. That hasn't been the case for several years. And now there is no majority. We're 39% Asian. We're 29% white. We're 24% Hispanic, and then all of the rest. But here's what's interesting. Even though we're the nation's most diverse region, we are choosing not to live in diverse neighborhoods. This is a chart showing you what the Bay Area looked like in 1980. And if it's green, that means that those neighborhoods are diverse. And if it's red, that means that they're not. So here we are in 1990. And you can see the red increasing. Look at that, 2000, we're mostly red. That means that when you look at your neighbor, that means it's a very high percentage that your neighbor doesn't look like you do. Or now, if you're in red, it's a very high percentage that your neighbor looks exactly like you. That's what I'm trying to say. And now look at us here in 2010, mostly red. So that's interesting. Even though we're a diverse region, we haven't sorted ourselves. We have sorted ourselves into homogeneous neighborhoods. Now, we also know that there are persistent disparities by race. The dropout rates, the educational attainment levels, those those tracked by race. And so it's very sad to know that about our region. Nevertheless, those are the facts, and I'm here to present those facts. But this astonished us. Even though there are these persistent and profound racial disparities, they also obtain, even if the people are of similar educational levels of attainment. So I'm going to call that out for you here, and we'll put it in plain English. In Silicon Valley, it's true that Hispanic and Latino residents make an average wage that's 64% less than similarly educated white residents. In other words, they have the same level of education. In the case of our Black or African-American residents, it's 50%. I showed you this chart already. 33% are not self-sufficient. I just want you to understand that that also tracks by race and ethnicity of the householder. And so this shows you that. And these are sad things. But in my remaining time, I also wanted to point this out. The hope has always been that tech, our burgeoning tech sector, can be a pathway to address these disparities, and that there will be opportunities there and pipelines. And for a fact, our tech companies are working on this. There are the leadership of those tech companies have expressed themselves committed to doing something about these disparities. And I believe that they are absolutely sincere. However, it's not there yet. It's not happening yet. And that's what this chart shows you. As of December 31st, 2021, this is what it looks like in the leadership ranks of our largest tech companies. 61% of the leaders are white, 25% are Asian. So about 86% of the leadership roles are held by whites or Asians. Hispanics only in 5% of those roles. For our African-American members, it's merely 3%. That's what it looks like. Even though, as I just mentioned, our Hispanics account for about a quarter of the population, and those proportions don't obtain in the tech sector. So we have work to do. This is the saddest chart of all. It shows you that the people that are working on the front lines during the pandemic were also sorted by race. In other words, the people that were holding those front lines jobs and therefore had the most exposure to the disease prior to the vaccine tended to be our Hispanic or African-American members. And their death rate was twice and 3 times that of white counterparts during the pandemic. So these are pretty stark things. I want to conclude by asking this question, and then we can talk about it in the comment period. The question is, are we experiencing an exodus? I want to tell you that the answer to that question is hard to come up with. We're not sure yet. We're just not sure. We don't know the answer to that. We don't know the answer to that question. It is true that a lot of people during the pandemic chose to leave and work remotely. That technically is not an exodus. Technically, that job is still in Silicon Valley. It still counts on our payrolls. It still counts on our tax rolls. And so we're not choosing to call that an exodus. We're calling it an exodus when people choose to leave the region, when human capital and other forms of capital leave the region. And the question is, are we experiencing that? And so far, we're not. We are experiencing population decline, but that's fed by lower birth rates and by higher death rates because we do have an aging population now. And then it's also attributed to the policies of the previous administration in the White House, which just factually speaking, made our country less hospitable, far less hospitable to people who would be immigrating here, and did that in a number of ways, including the quotas themselves. And so for those 3 reasons, at least, we've had, we have declining population growth. And then there is outmigration. People are choosing to move out of the region. And the absolute number was 40,000. That's what this chart is showing you. 40,000 left the region. But remember, our workforce is 1.7 million in Silicon Valley. And so 40,000 really is a small, maybe even an insignificant percentage of that total number. So we have to put it in that perspective. Although there may be increasing trends, and they may be they may be speeding up. So it wouldn't surprise me if in coming years we see more out-migration. One reason is because we've learned that you can do the sorts of things you do in Silicon Valley working remotely, and so that might become a major trend. I think a more important question, oh, by the way, of those 40,000 that are leaving, there is a notion that they're going to Austin. That's what people think. And then there's the notion people are saying they're going to Miami and that they're going to Denver, to those places. What we actually found is that they're not leaving the Bay Area. They're moving to the perimeter of the Bay Area. That was an interesting finding for us. And why the perimeter? Because that's where the housing is more affordable. And then if they leave the Bay Area, we find that they're going to Sacramento. And then finally, we've learned that they're going to Seattle, to Phoenix, and then finally to Austin and places like that. So those are interesting findings so far. I think this is a more important question. Are we losing companies? If we stop repeating our pattern of reinvention and company formation and entrepreneurship and the innovation that happens here, then that really does spell a new chapter in our unfolding history. So this is an important question. Here's the answer to the question. So far, we've lost 4 companies. And let me tell you who those companies are. It's these 4: Oracle, HP, Palantir, and Tesla. And frankly, in my view, the reason we lost those companies is because their CEOs had particular reasons. There were stories that were particular to each company, and they weren't necessarily leaving and dusting their feet and saying good riddance to the Bay Area. They had things that they had reasons that compelled them to leave. And yes, they relocated the headquarters, but what's also significant is that they left their workforce behind. In fact, HP and Oracle and Tesla actually increased their square footage in the Bay Area. Tesla took out more square footage where its headquarters is located in Palo Alto, and they're still investing in the plant in Fremont. So we have to put it in that perspective as well. This is my last chart. This chart shows you 3 things in one chart. It's a busy chart, but the size of the bubble tells you it tells you the total number of tech jobs. The location on the x-axis tells you the growth rate, how much you're growing in terms of tech talent, and then the y-axis is telling you the share of the workforce that tech is claiming. And so where you want to be on this chart is up and to the right, and there we are. There's no place even approaching us. With possible exception of Seattle, but they're still in our wake. And so this, I think, is how we have to think about this as we talk about the Exodus. And with that, I think I will just throw up this website. This is our website, jointventure.org. You can go there. You can sign up for our materials. We would love to send you all of these things and invitations to our events. And so you can just go there and you can sign up, and we would love to have you as part of the joint venture family. And with that, Roger, let me stop sharing my screen and I'll go over to you.
Oops. Well, thank you very much, Russell. That was really, really interesting. I want to thank you for being here. Russell Hancock, Joint Venture Silicon Valley.